Hello.
Hey.
Hey, this is our second orientation for GPAHG, the Greater Pasadena Affordable Housing Group, and we thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to get started. Let me share the PowerPoint we're using. It's right here. So let me get this to the full screen for us. Now, the focus of this particular orientation is more looking at our approach, advocacy, which we call redemption of the city. We'll unpack that a little, and then the core values that we have as an organization, and then a theology of land and housing. So let's get started.
All right.
Advocacy. Yeah, redemption of the city. It's an interesting concept to think about how the very structure and laws of the city need to be redeemed, and so that they're more geared toward those most vulnerable. And so that's, if you look at Old Testament, and we'll unpack that some later, but the whole idea of prophets speaking to cities about doing justice, this is really what we're doing here. There's some great models in the scripture of teams that work together to do this kind of work. Jesus himself had 12, and I think that's a good number for us to think about. You know, we need at least that many to really create change, but it's surprising how few you really need to make the change that is needed. When you go to big meetings, you need a lot of folks, but the core team, 12 is a really good number. We do need to do research. So we've got some folks on our team that just love research. But others, that's not their thing, you know, and that's okay, but there's room for everyone to use their gifts. But typically when we research an issue, we compare to other cities, what, for example, their inclusionary policy is, or their policies are for back houses. And then once we get a feel for what's going on in the area and other parts of the country, we come to our conclusions of what we think is good for our city, or whichever city we're working in. And then out of that, we create talking points. But it's all very well researched. And our city council members and public bodies we attend really appreciate the research that we do. We prioritize. You know, we would love to see housing justice happen just like that, but it's a process, and you need to be sensitive to what is important and what is passable. So we would love to see rent control. When we started this work in 2000, that was what we first promoted, and it was crazy. They did not even write our names down that we had come to public.
Wow.
They just, you know, they said, well, it'll never happen in the city, so we didn't even record you were present.
Wow.
So that's actually not legal. They have to record who came and some of the points they made. But obviously, the city was not ready for that. It is now. We've got plenty of folks leading that campaign. Gratefully, GPAHG is not leading that, but we're supporting it. But we're doing affordable housing, and especially for those that are at the lower income levels. The fourth point here, building consensus. Boy, is it frustrating for our elected officials when we all come with a different idea of what we think should happen. If we're united in heart and mind, it really helps to build the strong voice we need to create the change. And then one-on-ones. Typically, before we even show up at a public meeting at the Planning Commission or the Ed Tech Subcommittee or the City Council, whichever body we're seeking to advocate to, that we've often had those meetings one-on-one and pretty much know where they're going to vote even before we go to that public meeting. Those one-on-ones are really the gold of any kind of organizing and advocacy work. And then bringing crowds. So when we do go to those public meetings, we need a lot of folks. You know, if we're having a prayer vigil, we want a lot of folks, and we're hoping that the media will come and really show how much we care as a city. There's parades, there's all different ways, affordable housing tours, forums. We've done a number of housing forums. So, but for the most part, it's the city council that we're advocating for. And we've been in the newspaper a lot by the crowds we've brought to public meetings. But once things are passed, you know, justice is eternal vigilance. You can get a great policy passed, but then something's happened with the enforcement mechanism, and it's just not happening. You know, they haven't yet really made sure it's in the books, and developers are following what it actually says. So I'm going to unpack each of these just a little, and Morgan is here with us. I've got a few questions along the way that I'll be asking you, Morgan, so thank you for your time.
Yeah.
So building those teams, and that has to do with creating a membership. So we do have membership forms. We have several kinds of members. But those teams, let's just talk for a minute about that. I know you've probably been on a number of teams, Morgan, that some are really good and you feel really good about yourself, and others are like, this is not a team I want to come back to.
Right.
So give me an idea of a team that you have really enjoyed that you've been on.
Yeah, I think back to one of my experiences in a young adult group at a church I attended in the past, and I really felt like the pastor of that group was able to call out a couple of things about me that could, you know, help facilitate discussion in a group environment. And so I really did feel like I had a place in that group, and was able to contribute and be a benefit to other people by using something.
Tell us what that gift is he noticed.
He mentioned that I ask really good questions, and that I tend, even in conversation, I tend to ask people questions and, you know, get them to talk about themselves. So you're saying that could be useful for, you know, people coming to a new group, they're nervous, they're not sure how they're going to fit in, but it means a lot to someone to have someone, you know, really wanting to know them and who they are. So, yeah.
Well, it means a lot to me too. That's one of the things I love about you, Morgan. But I think any team, you know, seriously, I think any team, you know, needs every type of person, you know, those people willing to ask questions, even the hard questions. It's got to be a level of trust with each other, some fun, and people using their strengths, you know, what they really enjoy doing. People are not going to be motivated around things they're not good at. But at the same time, we want to stretch people to kind of go a little beyond their comfort zone. And when we know we're growing and challenging ourselves, then that brings joy to our souls. But everyone needs to be valued and heard on our teams as we seek to build consensus. And that takes time, you know, to really build consensus. And but it's worth the process so that we're united. There's levels of membership: affiliate, active, and liaison. You could see on this next slide, there's some of the forms for that. The liaison membership, we're working on, especially right now, to get, by the end of 2020, 25 new churches, congregations, institutions to participate as liaisons to our group. So that when we do go to the city council, typically we find out on a Thursday night the agenda, and then Monday is the council meeting. So by those liaisons having access to make announcements, or having a team of 5 to 10 people from their church willing to show up on Monday, those times when we do need the crowds, boy, that's going to help us a lot, and it's going to show the really broad-based interest in trying to bring it to our city. So research, I mentioned briefly about this, but this research doesn't take place in our monthly meetings, more in our small teams. And, you know, there's all different types of research. Sometimes we've called different public interest lawyers on certain bills to get some clarification. Sometimes we do public information requests from the city to find out, for example, how many people are building back houses. We do all kinds of things depending on the message and what we need to know to substantiate our points. And sometimes we have partners in our research teams. We realize that there's other teams going on in the city that know a lot more than we do. For example, recently with the YWCA, it's a new team, and we're partnering with the preservationist. And they've already done so much research in the city on how to preserve the YWCA that we can just borrow their research. You know, it makes it easy for us, and we're building a broader, what we call the beloved community as we do this work. And then we seek to make sure that research is really thorough. It's so, you know, the public is looking at our research. That's how we build credibility in our work, to make sure it's accurate and thorough. And so that's a reputation we've received in the last 20 years of making sure people really appreciate us because our research is so accurate and so thorough. But we even research our decision makers. You know, we want to find out who they are. What are the things they're interested in? If they've been running a Boy Scout troop for years, maybe the best person to speak is not us, but someone who leads the Boy Scout troop. And you're going to hear that person because we've taken time to learn what's important to that particular leader. We have some great examples here. You might want to take the time to look at some of the research we've done. We did a beautiful comparative analysis. The city actually never did the research on ADUs, those back houses, to find out how many we had. We did that research, and we had an intern who was a realtor and also a student at Fuller who identified 740 of those back houses. And Morgan, I think you're in one of those, right? Those back houses.
My husband and I, we rent one of the back houses on my parents' property, and so it's been wonderful. It's been really great to have that place, and so really grateful for that bit of work there.
Many of us have space in our backyards, and single family zoning really is not very sustainable in cities today. We need to make our cities a little more dense and go up and use this land we have even in our backyard. So I just really appreciate that your parents were willing to allow you and your husband to live here. So here's another link you might want to research later, the anti-camping ordinance. There was one city council member that really wanted to make it illegal to be homeless. And so when you criminalize homelessness and push people into jails instead of providing housing, it's not only unconstitutional, but it's also highly expensive. It's not at all a solution. So we had some key people in the city share these talking points. And one night at the city council, it was like a church. It was amazing. The Spirit of God was just moving. You could see the hearts change that evening. And then we've done some really good research on inclusionary policies around the country. So take a peek at those if you want to go deeper. The comparative analysis, the first one I mentioned, we actually did some great comparing of different parts of the city that have a high number of back houses and other streets that had none. And we looked at crime, we looked at visibility, we looked at parking, traffic, and in every case, there was really no difference. So that was a powerful research we did. Now, prioritize. I mentioned before, rent control was just not at all what the city was ready for. But here, almost 20 years later, thankfully, the tenant protection folks are willing to go through the initiative process. Our city council is not open to that, but the people of the city are. And so they've been getting signatures 2 years ago when we did partner with them and help that group. We got 10,224 signatures of folks in the city, but we really needed 13 in order to get it passed. So we're trying again this year. So that's interesting to see if we are able to get it on the ballot. So again, after years of research on ADUs and seeking to make that legal again, those accessory dwelling units, we now have it more doable for families and not quite so expensive if you include affordability. Um, so, finally it's priority, but we had to go to the state and get the state to work with us on some of the policy to make this happen. Building consensus, again, I mentioned how important that is. It does take more time, but ultimately it saves time when you're, and we have consistent messaging of what we're trying to say. And we need to support each other.
Right.
So the one-on-ones with decision makers, it's not always easy scheduling these appointments with our decision makers. It's much more possible if we make sure that it's someone within that person's district that's present in these meetings. So we always try to make sure the person that makes the appointment is from that person's district.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
I'm in Tyrone's district. You can see his handsome face here with a red tie. And so before he was elected, I had a list of about 10 things that I wanted him to do as a city council member. The night before his election, it was so funny. I said, okay, where are you at, Tyrone? And he said, well, I'll do 8 of your 10. I said, okay, then I'll vote for you. That's good. And he's been faithful. He's really worked on those 8 things. And so he's really been good for our district.
Wow.
He's a real collaborator and real willing to work with the public and listen to what the public wants. So it'd be interesting to brainstorm some strategies to get appointments. Some city council members we've actually never met with. They've never been willing to. So sometimes you just have to show up at meetings where they are. One council member in East Pasadena, I had actually been praying for years that I'd be able to meet with him. And at a Leadership Pasadena graduation, I saw him and he was sitting right down from me. And so I walked over to him afterwards and I said, you know, I've been actually praying for years that I'd have a chance to have a conversation with you. He said, you have? He was so surprised, you know. And I said, yeah. And he says, well, what do you want to talk with me about? So I just summarized it. Theology of land and housing, my biblical perspective. I don't know if he's a person of faith, but he was fascinated.
Wow.
He so appreciated what I shared. And he actually called me the next day. And he wanted up on Monday at the city council. So I did. I was there for him until midnight on Monday, advocating that development in his district would include affordable units. So so you have to get creative to build these relationships. So again, meeting one-on-one, as I mentioned, or so, it's just so important. We seek to maintain a humble posture of learning. We don't want to be confrontational. When we meet with our city council members one-on-one, once in a while, we do need to be a little bit direct, and that's okay. We need to have a strong position at times, but always with love, always with mercy, and always affirming the person and their willingness to be in meetings and really hear our positions. And we also listen to theirs. We're not shy about our positions. And that's in keeping with the biblical mandates. There's many times that the prophets were not at all afraid of confrontation. I don't know, maybe some of those prophets were shaking in their boots, who knows, but they did confront authorities when needed. That children are often some of the best advocates. It's very powerful. When kids come to the city council, they are smart. This one gal, Lily, who's there in the middle, she is going to be facing hard times in the future if there's no housing she can afford when she's ready to graduate, go to college, and start a family. So they can speak with power. We had a 12-year-old come and speak a number of years ago named Nicole. And oh my gosh, she was so powerful. She won the award for the best essay for the Martin Luther King essay contest. And it was all about Martin Luther King and housing. Wow. And so I asked her, I said, why don't you share that at the city council? She goes, oh, I'd love to, you know, and her whole family came, they supported her. It was a beautiful speech, and it went a little over the 3 minutes allotted. All the city council members turned the little light off so she could finish her speech. And at the end, she said, you know, I won $250 and I want to give this to the city. I understand that you're not interested. Part of the reason you're not interested right now in doing a housing commission for the city is because you lack funds. So I want to make sure you have this. It was so amazing. One of the city council members stood up, opened his arms big and wide. He says, why does it take, and you know, actually she was 11 at the time. Why does it take an 11-year-old to teach us what we all should be doing? So you could hear a pin drop when she was speaking. It was so powerful. But also one-on-ones with developers. At times it's highly effective to meet with certain developers. I'm just gonna show you something if I can figure out how to share again. Let's see, let's go back here. I may not be able to figure it out. Well, maybe not. I'm obviously not too technically savvy with all of this. I thought I was. So let's see, try one more time. Well, so what I wanted to share is how I was reading in the newspaper. And what I have here with me is, and maybe you can kind of see it a little bit just through this tiny picture, but this particular newspaper article says that there's a need for 759,000 low-cost homes. And, you know, we're really in a housing crisis in our nation, and people are being priced out. Right. Yeah. It's a very serious issue. It's not even on the presidential debates, so it needs to become a national issue. But it's in the newspaper every day. At least the media is recognizing it. And so I was reading the paper one morning, and I typically read the Bible and newspaper every morning. It's going to get my marching orders, oftentimes from the newspaper. So I read that there was this proposal of 800 units in Pasadena, and it gave the name of the developer. And so I looked him up on the internet and I called him. It was a developer out of Irvine, California. And I said, I'd like to meet with you guys. And so I met with them. They were eager to meet because they want to make sure that they get approvals, you know. And so we sat down and I said, you know, we have inclusionary policy in our city where you have to set aside a percentage of units. So 800 units is a lot, you know. Are you going to, you know, do a percentage? And they said, you know, probably. You know, I said, you have the choice to pay a fee or to build offsite. And they said, no, we'll probably include the units. But then I asked them at what income level, at the low, very low, moderate, very, you know, and they said, well, probably the moderate. And I said, you know, our group is really about supporting the very low and the lower income levels. So we're not going to be able to support you on this, but if you change your mind, let me know, and let's just see what you think, and in 2 weeks, let's meet. So we met 2 weeks later, and it was amazing. Oh my goodness, Morgan, I could not believe it. They said, you know, we're not going to do just the 15%. They actually made 20% of all. Wow. And they did them all at the very low income level. Wow. So we have 97 very low income units in this beautiful development that are not any different than the luxury units. There's no whatsoever. And this is next to Gold Line. So it's, you know, car, it's close to Old Town, you're close to shops, close to jobs. It's really development at its finest. So bringing crowds, I mentioned that as part of our, you know, our plan in redemption of the city. And so you can sometimes just see the city council members, their heads are kind of bouncing up and down. You know, they're counting. They're counting how many people are out there. And that'll help them decide what to vote on. And it really does demonstrate that the community is united and cares. So really anyone can show up. Just your presence without saying a word can sometimes help get things passed. But if people do want to speak, their stories are so powerful. If you, whatever your housing story is, if you've struggled at some point, or if you're a wealthy person who still can't pay enough for your employees to be able to live in town, that's a story too. So there's often key stakeholders that we get to know in the city, and those are also the ones we need to make sure show up. So I mentioned stories. This is a beautiful story. This is a gal, Dorothy, who's kind of the poster child for those that have experienced homeless long term. She was homeless for 17 years, a hardcore drug user, and she carved out a little home for herself under the freeway embankment. She had a little couch and everything down in there. And she turned her life around through people reaching out and slowly building trust. And finally, she allowed herself to get housed. And she's stable. She's now on national boards. They fly her around the country on the National Board for Supportive Housing. And when she speaks, it's so powerful. She's so full of love. So these types of stories are very transformational, not only for the person, but for the whole city. When those in power can hear how people's lives have changed because of the type of housing that they're supporting. And then just showing up makes a big difference. When we had big vigils and public sessions, educational sessions, it really demonstrates the community interest. And it also makes it newsworthy, as I mentioned. We've been published many times in the newspaper. One of our actions this last spring on Martin Luther King Day was to work with Fuller Seminary to make sure that 169 units on their campus that are designated as inclusionary to remain permanently affordable. We prayed, we had a huge prayer vigil, and the 3 different newspapers came out to support that and write about it. It was very powerful. But as I mentioned before, justice is eternal vigilance. You can get great policies, but they can sit on the shelf. And sometimes we have to go and say, look, we need to make sure this gets implemented. With the ADUs, those accessory dwelling granny flats, some great policy happened that we worked hard on for years in 2017. But it wasn't until a year later that the staff finally had all the protocols ready for allowing people to actually build those. So we kept working closely with the city and encouraging them to move this forward and offering our help where we could. So here we are advocating. We at the planning commission level, we even had a little float. And we had it at a parade, but then we had it for multiple uses. We brought it to the city council as well as the planning commission, and they appreciated it. It was fun. It brought levity, And so pop quiz: which of the following is a way to build a good team? Housing justice is such a serious issue. It's best to make sure no fun is involved. Or give jobs to people that aren't their strengths to challenge them. Or C, actively listen to each person and value what they say. So,
let's go with C.
Pretty no-brainer there. And so which is not a good practice to conducting research? A, listen to those most in need. And B, carefully listen to the decision makers and know their background. C, find out what other cities are doing and adopt good practices, best practices. And D, argue with the decision makers. Make sure you point out the faults that they have, especially in public.
Right. I think a lot of people may think that's the way to go, but ultimately it's not.
Yeah. You do a lot better with honey rather than bitter herbs. Then thirdly, how do we go about bringing crowds to public meetings when needed? A, have liaison members who can reach out to their churches. B, invite those experiencing homelessness those now housed to tell their stories. C, invite the wealthy residents to support the cause, as well as business owners telling how they can't pay their employees enough to live close by. Or D, trick people into attending the city council meetings by telling them there'll be a 5-course meal before the council meeting.
I don't know. People do like to eat.
We probably need to work on our better pop quiz. That might be someone's gift. They can help us come up with some great pop quizzes here. So I'm going to stop here right now. The GPAHG new member orientation, the core values. I think it's probably good to take a little break, and we'll start up on the next portion of this in a separate meeting. So thank you again for your time, and we really value your input. And after you've heard these meeting webinars, we hope that you'll feel more equipped to join and apply to be a member, or even a liaison member. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Morgan? Yeah.
I can still.
Can you, I want to end the meeting because I know it's 5. Don't you need to go?
Yeah, let me come.
Okay. We haven't talked in advance about your time.
Oh, that was a good idea though, ending it at that section, because now I can see the part.
I'm all nervous and I can't. It's not set up the way I'm used to, so I don't know how to end the meeting. I hope it recorded. Oh, that's what I was looking for. I couldn't find that ribbon. It disappeared. But we need to stop the meeting too. How do you stop the meeting? Pause. Okay. Okay.
You're just gonna do all that to get to